Welcome to Rising Leaders of New York with your host, David Zwerin of Hill and Moin LLP. They present to you conversations with today's and future leaders of New York City discussing the challenges and issues relevant to New Yorkers. You can find this show at www.hillmoin.com and on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Now here are the hosts of Rising Leaders of New York.
Hello, everybody. I hope everybody is having a great day. This is Rising Leaders of New York. My name is David Zwerin. I am the senior trial attorney here at the law firm of Hill and Moin LLP. We are a plaintiff's personal injury firm, particularly focusing on premises liability matters and labor law construction accidents that happen here in New York State. On this podcast, I have the privilege of getting to talk to a lot of very interesting guests and leaders in the community, in the state, on the cutting edge of topics that New Yorkers need to know about in the world today. And I have a very interesting guest on the show today. I have the pleasure of speaking with Arthur Miller. He's an attorney in Rego Park, New York, which is near my hometown, our current residence out in Forest Hills. So I expect we're going to have a very interesting conversation. Arthur is a traffic ticket attorney. He's also a big advocate in the trucking industry. So I imagine we'll have a lot of things to talk about. Our office has some interesting overlap handling some motor vehicle accidents. So I think we're going to have a lot of interesting things to talk about. And Arthur, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, David, for having me on. It really is a privilege. Yeah, it's very exciting. You cover all the bases. It's a fascinating area. I mean, what I basically do are handle traffic tickets and court appearances. Basically any issue for people who drive motor vehicles, but primarily I work with the trucking industry because I was the in-house safety director for a trash hauler years ago, so I got very familiar with a lot of their issues. So they have some different issues than the ordinary help. I got a red light camera or a red light ticket from someone. So it's an exciting area. I'm sorry?
What are those issues, curiously?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
What are those issues?
For trucking firms?
Yeah, for the firm you mentioned.
Oh,
or for trucking in general.
Well, for trucking, these days, a lot of sort of the measures of safety are stops by the police, usually for traffic violations. So law enforcement is able to stop. Certainly, we hear about DWIs and other things. We have a long tradition of traffic rules, which pretty much started here in New York City, but certainly is countrywide, where let's say something like going through a red light or not stopping at a stop sign or speeding can be the basis of a traffic stop. And then once that happens, you get there's an interaction with the police where the police can get to say, can inquire, has somebody been drinking, or maybe there's, when they run the record, is there a warrant for their arrest or something like that. So there's sort of like this industry, if you will, for traffic enforcement. That particularly in New York has sort of metastasized into other areas where you have different agencies that again, arguably it's for safety's sake or health's sake, but you have different agencies that use ticketing to both raise revenue and sort of, let's say, for the safety's sake. So parking tickets, almost everyone that operates a vehicle in the New York City area is very familiar with, where you have agents who work for the police, but they're not, law enforcement with guns, who can issue tickets If you're blocking a fire hydrant or blocking this or blocking that. The trucking industry, they get a heck of a lot more than most average individuals.
Why is
And
that?
traditionally, um, there are some defenses for commercial firms that individuals don't have. So, for example, at least until more recently, a truck double parking outside of Midtown Manhattan, as long as they had proof that they were making an expeditious delivery, that ticket would be dismissed. But over the last few years, what they've done is taken away that. They've expanded the area where the one can't double park, and then of course they've put in bike lanes, and they've put in bus lanes, and they've put in outdoor dining, and they've put in this and they've put in that. So they're far there are many less opportunities for commercial firms to park legally, yet they still get all of these tickets. So obviously they need to be defended. And then there are some other areas that also trucking companies get. And David, you and I spoke offline, but one area is that the city has been giving out summonses for commercial vehicles if their engines are idling for more than 3 minutes, 1 minute in a school. They started a program a couple of years ago where they let individuals initiate these tickets. And what they do is they upload video evidence, and then the city issues a summons. So right now, some of these firms are facing thousands of dollars in fines, and there are some due process issues and things like that, which certainly we've been working on. But to me, a summons is what they call a notice of violation. It's letting somebody know they did something wrong. If you get a parking ticket, usually you get that pretty quickly. It says don't park near a hydrant. The fine is $115. Some of these other things that companies weren't getting for a year, 2 years after the fact, it's kind of hard to go back and reprimand the driver or make a change. So these things will all have to get straightened out. But sort of circling back to where I was at the beginning, it's viewed that ticketing is is for safety, but it's viewed. It really is a huge source of revenue for the city, and
Arthur,
that becomes a problem.
Arthur, on that topic, you and I were talking about the issue of the city is obviously very interested in making money per ticket. They have their red light cameras and their speeding cameras, and it's a big money making industry. But I don't really know how trucks are able to just comply with doing their job the way the city's set up. I'm sure having your office out in Rego Park, you drive around on Austin Street or Queens Boulevard with the proliferation of bus lanes all over the place, the outdoor dining you mentioned. I don't know how anybody does a delivery other than to double park or park somewhere illegal, or I guess idle and get fined. So what exactly happens? What is the process that if people get these fines that must be very rampant? What's the process for fighting them? What's the due process like?
There's certainly there are different agencies involved, but parking tickets, the framework for the Parking Violations Bureau was sort of set by the state legislature. So there has to be notice, the term, which is a parking ticket, what's stated in that notice. There are certain pieces of information that must be reported, and then that ticket is mailed, or they leave a copy on the vehicle. And if one disputes it, you have an opportunity to sit in front of a judge, or do it virtually in front of it, or online in front of a judge, and you can raise your issues. Some folks may have heard there are some groups, some of these transportation advocacy groups, are pushing back on a program that was started with the city many years ago called the stipulated fine program. The stipulated fine program is basically something for fleets, and a fleet can be even one vehicle, commercial vehicle. And you basically say, listen, city, I'll give up my right to fight this ticket. You'll send me a bill and you'll list the tickets, and certain things are discounted. So I mentioned earlier that, let's say, double parking was, with proper proof, a commercial firm could get that dismissed. So the double parking under the stipulated fine program was greatly reduced to, I don't know, maybe $10 or something like that. But they're not issuing as many anymore. So what's happened is, so some of these groups say, oh, these companies are getting some kind of discounts. But the reality is, if the city had to try each one of these cases, if everybody had their opportunity in court, the city would have to hire all these additional judges. And the companies that sign on to this program, they'd also have to hire people just to be fighting these things. Back years ago, they used to have what they used to call it the UPS room, because I think UPS was like one of the largest recipients of tickets. They had a separate room just designated, just set aside for all of their tickets, and obviously UPS had to have a huge staff just to fight them. And of course, the city had to have a staff of attorneys just to handle the claim. So it sort of worked out better that, they sort of look at the percentages of what kind of tickets are issued and what the success rate would be. And that's how they have this stipulated fine program. So so the answer to your question about how to handle these things, it does become something that has to be incorporated into the business, just like any sort of tax, but it can be very costly. And then, of course, frequency with towing and things like that. I think a scarier thing is with these camera issued violations, where I'd be concerned about somebody who gets labeled. So let's say, I think, David, you mentioned the red light cameras. You also have speeding cameras and things like that. There was a move afoot that if somebody gets more than a certain number of these speeding cameras, that somehow their driving privilege should be suspended. A problem with that is, at least right now, the camera can only issue a ticket to the registered owner of the vehicle.
How do you know who's driving it?
So they don't know who's driving. So what they can do is say, if somebody, and they did pass a law saying that if a vehicle got more than so many camera speeding tickets within a certain amount of time, that the owner would have to take some kind of class, or else they'll suspend the registration. But that becomes a safety issue. And I have to worry, certainly for my own insurance costs and for the trucking firms that I work with. You don't want things to come back and say, it's going to raise your rates even higher. Let's say if you just got some camera issued ticket, so or a parking ticket for that matter. So these are things that definitely have to be watched.
It's interesting you mentioned companies managing their costs, and I'm sure for a lot of these trucking individuals, maybe maybe they work for big companies, or maybe they're kind of running their own business, but this is their livelihood. And at the end of the day, when you have an issue of people being subject to just too many egregious fines, that it becomes a problem, people are going to look to cut corners, and not necessarily say they'll be more negligent, but people are going to want to save money in their budget where maybe they shouldn't be. A thing I think about in my experience as a personal injury attorney is, are people, because of their bottom line, whether they're thinking about their business or about their personal budget, making good, smart, responsible decisions with the insurance they purchase? People should be knowledgeable in the injury perspective, that they're using their budget to hopefully purchase a solid amount of bodily injury insurance. You can drive around the state with $25,000 $50,000 minimum. That doesn't mean that's a nice thing to do if you have the money in your budget to afford to give more. And you can also protect yourself by getting additional SUM or underinsured motorist coverage, which is a good thing to do for you and your family. And as a further example on that, I recently came across an accident where, after the fact, I happened to see that a car had been impacted by a driver going down the wrong way. Parked car gets hit, and the owner of the car, turns out, doesn't have collision on it. A budgetary decision is made not to have collision, which is something where you're thinking, okay, well, I'll just save money that way, which is fine until you need it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. When we mentioned offline, I mean, I live here in New York and I work here, and I'm an avid bike rider, and, I love exploring the neighborhoods, and it amazes me to see the number of parked cars with out of state plates. And, that many of them are, I think the law is if the car is registered here, is sort of based here for more than 30 days, you're supposed to register in New York. So, but a lot of it is the insurance costs, and that concerns me, because somebody may not be covered ultimately, if they're involved in an accident.
So I think it's a real problem, and I'll say that from my perspective as a personal injury attorney, a lot of people might think that for plaintiff's personal injury, we're going after trucks, we're going after trucking companies. The truth of the matter is, I want trucking companies. First of all, I don't want anyone to get hurt. Accidents are going to happen anyway, but I want people to be driving around, making good decisions, and not be cutting corners as to their insurance. We sue for negligence. At the end of the day, people should be keeping what money they have. You're also mentioning an interesting thing about that the city council might be proposing a new law that's going to create a system that's going to make it even easier for them to, I guess, have people assist them in finding out about tickets. Is that right?
Well, I mentioned there's a program now to let citizens submit the information that leads to the basis of an engine idling case for a trucking company. In other words, if a vehicle, the law in New York has been for many years not allowed to idle, let a commercial vehicle idle. Actually, not allowed to let any motor vehicle idle for more than 3 minutes. But they passed a law saying if it's a commercial vehicle or a bus, an individual who's not a city officer or employee can upload a video or some other information, and then the city issues the summons, and then the city gets 25% of that. I'm sorry, the citizen gets 25% if the city collects. So they've created a sort of bounty system, and that alone is very costly, and then I think there's some abuses, but the bottom line is hopefully it does change behavior. But there's a bill at the city council right now to let individuals issue parking tickets, and things like a car or truck in the bike lane, or near a fire hydrant, or things like that. And I think especially for that, there are a lot of nuances where you are allowed to drop something off or someone off. I have a elderly relative who lives in Midtown. There's a bike lane in front of her place, and she had to go to the hospital. Where do you think the ambulance had to park? I mean, it's there has to be parking available. So this notion of and I saw a demonstration video that some cyclist put online, and he just had a camera mounted on his head and on his helmet, and just riding around, and it says, oh, there's a violation, there's a violation, there's a violation. I can't even imagine sorting that out, including let's say if there's a car or a truck who's in one place for 5 minutes, and 5 cyclists came by and all issued tickets. How does that get sorted out? So but the city's talking about it. So it is before the city council. I think it's a risky thing. We don't like the idea of, we want safety, we want our streets to operate better, but I don't think we want to have to be looking over our shoulder, every time you see somebody coming down. Are we being coming down the street? Are we being surveilled, or is somebody going to take a picture of us?
It seems like a pretty risky venture for maybe people all of a sudden to become a little bit entrepreneurial and say, hey, I want to help report a ticket. I assume that there's a financial incentive to be helping the government issue these tickets, but maybe not every truck driver is going to be so happy that somebody is reporting them to the government.
Yeah,
be a polite, calm individual about it.
And it's sad, because we're humans. Not everything is black and white. So yes, somebody's doing something wrong should be cited. I'll give you a perfect example. Somebody in my neighborhood is very involved with one of the safety advocacy groups, and I ran into him outside a courthouse, and we were talking, and there's a bike lane there, and a taxi just like pulled into the bike lane to let somebody out. And he's first like, oh, this is terrible. You got to, he said, oh, he just let this person out. The guy didn't stay in the bike lane. He was there for like 30 seconds so the person could get out. What else is the driver of the taxi supposed to do? And, if we're not making provisions for these things. And, to me, this is sort of the fallacy of, and the risk of this, great rhetoric that almost all drivers are bad these days, and particularly trucking. And everyone has to realize that there's nuance in the world of human experience. These sort of privileges shouldn't be abused. But like I said, an ambulance, a taxi's got to stop in the bike lane because there's nowhere else to go. Or a handicapped person, what else do you do? What else do you do? Why should it be a source of revenue for the city every time that happens? I think that's a slippery slope.
I would tend to agree. It's, in the personal injury perspective, I bring a lawsuit. Let's say that two cars come into contact with each other, and perhaps one car merged into the other, or whether it's a T-bone. There could be contributing factors. It's possible negligence is shared between the two of them, which in this state allows kind of for a split decision that a jury can take into effect that more than one person can be responsible. But what you seem to be describing is an administrative procedure where if the truck driver did something wrong, they just did something wrong and they are responsible, and there is no consideration of of exacerbating factors or conditions on the ground that might be relevant here, which to me seems like a problematic way to go about things.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things that I've been interested in and have sort of advocated for is, let's say, honest talk about Vision Zero. To me, every time you read something in the paper, it's it's always the car for one thing, and to me, or the truck, and to me, again, especially as a cyclist, my philosophy has always been it's my responsibility to watch out for them. I can't expect them to always see me. Now, that said, the operator of the motor vehicle has the bigger the vehicle, the more responsibility. But I think some of these advocacy groups, almost feel like it's a blasphemy to say that pedestrians and cyclists and others have some personal responsibility. And there's almost no messaging about safety. So, for example, riding a bike in the correct direction, wearing a helmet. They actually fought. There was a bill at the city council a couple of years ago, and some of these advocates say, "Oh, don't make the cyclists wear helmets. That'll discourage some of them from riding." It's that if you truly care about safety, you want to say, "Hey, listen, wear visible clothing, follow the traffic rules, things like that." So, I mean, I take issue with the sort of lack of messaging. I also find myself very concerned with it almost seems like the cell phone social media industry seems to get a pass. Why are more and more people distracted, whether in their automobiles or just walking or even riding a bike, and they're on the phone? And everybody's caught up in that, and no one seems to say, "Hey, listen, if you're negotiating the streets in any way, you've got to pay attention." It just seems to be lacking. When I see a young parent pushing a stroller in the crosswalk and yabbering on the phone, they're not paying attention. So if, God forbid, a car or a truck doesn't see them or the stop sign, who's going to get hurt? I don't know. I find that troublesome.
The law, I know the law has been changed over the years, both I think locally and at the state level, to take into effect the idea that we are living in a world where people are driving around with cell phones. And I know if I'm driving around with a cell phone, whether or not I get into an accident, I'm getting probably 5 points for that. If I recall, maybe it's 6, but I'm at fault. I've done something wrong just because I was driving. Does that mean it's any much of a better idea to be putting my life at risk by being really distracted when I'm crossing the street? And I think at Vision Zero, if I was doing that and a truck hit me or a car hit me, I think they're just going to get an administrative code violation. There'd be nuance in the personal injury lawsuit, but it's a violation. So yeah, nuance is important, and I agree. Cell phones are a danger, and not just in a car.
Oh, absolutely. But again, you almost hear no messaging about that, they talk about speeding and things like that. But I think that there's so much more that could be done, or actually more than that. They talk about we need better infrastructure. There was just a newspaper article over the weekend about some young mother who was on a bike who was killed at an intersection in Brooklyn, and at least according to the paper, the police said that she was stopped at a red light, and then I think the truck, when the light turned green, she started to proceed, and the truck, I think, was also proceeding through the green light. And according to the paper, and who supposedly quoted the police, said that the young woman veered into the truck. So obviously they're both going in the same direction. You don't know if the truck was going to try to turn or something, but right away a lot of these groups say, we need more protected bike lanes. Well, in an intersection, I don't think that's really. It's kind of hard to have any kind of real protection other than maybe lights. Where there's a mixing of the two types of modes of transportation, but there really needs to be the ability to sort of analyze, each of these accidents, learn from what happened, but also the messaging. What if you're on a bike? What do you do when there is a truck coming? I mean, I've seen, and in fact, I've represented companies. Let's say a large tractor trailer coming through, and the cyclist came up from behind and wound up going under the rear wheels of the truck. Was the truck too big? Maybe. But if you're on a bicycle and you're trying to pass a truck, you have to think, where is the learning about how do trucks turn, coming into blind spots, all of these kind of things. It's very easy to turn it around. And for me, again, as somebody who works with trucks and who drives and who rides a bike, I think I sort of see it clearly that I think we'd all be a lot safer if there was more training. I know in Europe, there's some countries where they have mandatory training for kids at a certain age. There's talk about having cyclists have some kind of license or something now, and especially now because they've allowed mopeds, these sort of motorized, like the delivery scooters and things, mm-hmm. And those folks don't have to be licensed. So you sort of wonder, is there any training at all about the rules? So. Those are things that concern me. I think we'd all be safer.
No. we could talk for another hour on the tangent you just opened up on e-scooters, which is one of the most dangerous new innovations of modern transportation. And
I'll just say, have you ever tried one, Dave?
I haven't tried one, but
I tried one. I was in
it looked like
I
fun,
was
but
in
they're
another
also
city, and they had them.
exceptionally
It's pretty
dangerous.
cool. It's exhilarating though, and I can see how. I mean, you can go sort of fast, but just sort of knowing, what I have experienced, I don't feel that safe on it. I don't think I'm that visible, really.
No,
So
and you're kind of paying for the lack of safety. When they created the no fault law, it doesn't apply to motorcycles. So, you drive around an actual motor vehicle. I don't know why a motorcycle doesn't count and you don't get the protections of the New York State no fault law, but motorcycles have their issue with safety, and certainly e-scooters do it. It's a new emerging area and teeming with potential for injuries these days, and also just people parking them in crazy dangerous ways, which also is a bane of my existence. I drive around Manhattan looking for a spot and see them parked in crazy manners that make it hard for me to get out of a spot, or just parked on a sidewalk or God knows what way, subject to tipping over. But, there's a lot of issues with driving around the city. You said an interesting thing, by the way, before, as we're coming to an end, but I'm curious your thought about what the city can do to better improve their messaging about not only driver safety but pedestrian safety. Because one of the things I've always thought about this country is, we built an infrastructure where we want people to drive. We want people to feel safe when they're driving. So we have a system that penalizes bad drivers so the good drivers feel safe driving around and can go buy a bunch of cars. We don't have a system that really incentivizes or rewards or talks about what people need to do to be good pedestrians, because there's no money in being a good pedestrian. But you got to be a good pedestrian to have a good, solid, long life. So, what would you like to see done on the government level, state, locally, and how are you involved to improve advocacy and communication in this area?
I think there's actually been a little better messaging on the state level. There's the governor's was it governor's safety conference or whatever, where they do have things posted about, let's say, here are blind spots from a truck for a truck where visible reflective clothing, things like that. So I'd really just like to see. On a simple level here in the city, mostly the advertising put out by New York City DOT, similar things, just saying, be responsible, keep your eyes open, keep your head out of your apps, I like to say, and but also even the messaging for vehicles. I mean, a popular thing now that, in fact, the city put out a bunch of ads and public service announcements about control your speed, and then they show some picture of somebody tossed through the air or something like that. When I walk around, for example, even in my neighborhood, I see cars sort of making turns. There are a lot of accidents that are when vehicles turn, maybe less so because of the speeding, and I think taking turns carefully. I think that's a huge issue that the city should work on. Some of them, I've even taken pictures and have had video where they the cars seem to try to start the turn a good car length away from the intersection, which is not, what they teach you in driver's ed. When you cut a corner that acutely, you don't get you have less opportunity to see if there's somebody in the intersection. And they don't slow down. So that's something, better turning for drivers, I think, is something that I would personally like to see. As a cyclist, I would really like to see more messaging about using your signals, people don't seem to be, and it's funny, it seems to be the more expensive car, the less often they use the signals. But to signal your intentions as a pedestrian, as a cyclist, I rely on that a lot. Are they making a turn? Or are they going straight? So, and certainly as a driver, I would like to see more messaging about that. And then, of course, as I said, take off the headset. Don't be looking at the phone when you're walking. Wearing reflective clothes. Be visible. Follow the traffic rules. Also, I mean, interesting. Today I saw a video. Somebody got a ticket. A driver got a ticket for failure to yield the right of way to a cyclist. The guy had a dash cam. And on the dash cam, you could see the cyclist came off the sidewalk, riding the crosswalk, which is not permitted for a bicyclist. And the driver had the green light. So, again,
he's probably just getting a ticket.
I'll tell you, that's why I think everybody and any driver should have a camera now. But this is the thing that. It's against the law for an individual over the age of 12 to ride a bicycle on the sidewalk. Yet it's done with impunity. Where's the messaging about that? Those are the kind of things that I would like to see. Help educate people, and maybe some sort of required safety training. Again, particularly for these mopeds, because you've got these companies all profiting off of these the people zipping around, and they're paid by the piece. So there's an incentive to speed and break traffic laws. Yet there's I don't think they have adequate workers' comp. They don't have insurance. I think that aspect of the industry, I think, needs to be reined in, and certainly the messaging has to be better about what the rules are.
I couldn't agree more. I think there's a lot of issues in this country, and certainly this area, with messaging. And usually, what ends up happening is messaging goes where it's most profitable, unless there's enough public outcry and pressure on politicians that better messaging is needed. And human safety involving pedestrians and bicyclists should be an issue we're all interested in all the time, not just when there's money in it, or when enough terrible accidents happen that politicians are interested. So thank you for bringing these issues to our viewers' attention. Arthur Mill, if our guests, or if our listeners would like to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
My website. Well, I don't have a web. My phone number, 718-997-0641. That's 718-997-0641. And I will say I do have a website, or I'm the co-publisher of a website called NewYorkTruckStop.com, which sort of news and information for the trucking industry. So we talk about safety issues, among other things of concern to firms that operate commercial vehicles. So that's www.NewYorkTruckStop.com spelled out. So that's on the trucking end.
Thank you so much, Arthur.
Thank you for having me.
No, it was a pleasure. It was a great conversation. That is it for today, everybody. Thank you to everybody who is listening to this podcast. Until next time, when I'm back with another Rising Leader of New York, my name is David Zwerin with the law firm of Hill & Moin, LLP. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks so much.
You've been listening to Rising Leaders of New York, hosted by David Zwerin of Hill & Moin, LLP. You can catch prior episodes at www.hillmoin.com and on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, and sharing the show with others.